He was too stingy to keep it, he. But now he is so delighted over his new house that he has invited Semyon Ivanovitch Shipolenko and me, you know." Akim Petrovitch bent forward again. He bent forward zealously. Ivan Ilyitch felt somewhat comforted. It had struck him, indeed, that the head clerk possibly was guessing that he was an indispensable point d'appui for his Excellency at that moment. That would have been more horrid than anything. So we sat together, the three of us. He gave us champagne. We talked about problems, even disputed. Akim Petrovitch raised his eyebrows respectfully. "Only that is not the point. When I take leave of him at last, he is a punctual old fellow, goes to bed early, you know, in his old age. I go out. My Trifon is nowhere to be seen. I am anxious. I make inquiries. What has Trifon done with the carriage? It comes out that hoping that I should stay on, he has gone off to the wedding of some friend of his, or sister maybe, goodness knows, somewhere here on the Petersburg side, and took the carriage with him while he was about it." Again, for the sake of good manners, the general glanced in the direction of Selmadova. The later promptly gave a wiggle, but not all sort of wriggle the general would have liked. "He has no sympathy, no heart," flashed through his brain. "You don't say so," said Akim Petrovitch, greatly impressed. A faint murmur of surprise ran through all the crowd. "Can you fancy my position?" Ivan Ilyitch glanced at them all. There was nothing for it. I set off on foot. I thought I would trudge to the Great Prospect, and there find some cabby. He he. He he he. Akim Petrovitch echoed. Again a murmur, but this time on a more cheerful note, passed through the crowd. At that moment the chimney of the lamp on the wall broke with a crash. Someone rushed zealously to see to it. Somodovu started and looked sternly at the lamp, but the general took no notice of it, and was all serene again. I walked, and the night was so lovely, so still. All at once I heard a band, stamping, dancing. I inquired of a policeman, "Is it Selmadova's wedding?" "Why, you are giving a ball at the Why, you are giving a ball to all Petersburg side, my friend. Ha ha." He turned to Selmadova again. He. To be sure," Akim Petrovitch responded. There was a stir amongst the guests again, but what was most foolish was that Selmadova, though he bowed, did not even now smile, but seemed as though he were made of wood. "Is he a fool, or what?" thought Ivan Ilyitch. He ought to have smiled at that point. The ass! And everything would have run easily. There was a fury of impatience in his heart. "I thought I would go to see my clerk. He won't turn me out, I expect. Pleased or not, one must welcome a guest. You must please excuse me, my dear fellow. If I am in the way, I will go. But I only came to have a look." But little by little a general stir was beginning. Akim Petrovitch looked at him with a mawkish sweet expression, as though to say, "How could your Excellence be in the way?" All the guests stirred and began to display the first symptoms of being at their ease. Almost all the ladies sat down, a good sign, and a reassuring one. The boldest spirits among them fanned themselves with their handkerchiefs. One of them, in a shabby velvet dress, said something with intentional loudness. The officer addressed by her would have liked to have answered her as loudly, but seeing that they were the only ones speaking aloud, he subsided. The men, for the most part government clerks, with 2 or 3 students amongst them, looked at one another as though egging each other on to unbend, cleared their throats, and began to move a few steps in different directions. No one, however, was particularly timid, but they were all restive, and almost all looked with a hostile expression at the personage who had burst in upon them to destroy their gaiety. The officer, ashamed of his cowardice, began to edge to the table. "But I say, my friend, allow me to ask your name," Ivan Ilyitch asked Selmadova. "Porfiry Petrovitch, your Excellency," answered the latter, with staring eyes as though on parade. "Introduce me, Porfiry Petrovitch, to your bride. Take me to her. He showed some signs of desire to get up, but Selmadova ran at full speed to the drawing-room. The bride, however, was standing close by at the door, but as soon as she heard herself mentioned, she hid. A minute later Selmadova led her up by the hand. The guests all moved aside to make their way for them. Ivan Ilyitch got up solemnly and addressed himself to her with a most affable smile. "Very, very much pleased to make your acquaintance," he pronounced, with a most aristocratic half-bow, "especially on such a day." He gave a meaning smile. There was an agreeable flutter among the ladies. "Charmed," the lady in the velvet dress pronounced, almost aloud. The bride was a match for it. The bride was a match. Oh boy. The bride was a match for Selmadova. She was a thin little lady, not more than 17, pale, with a very sharp face and a sharp little nose. Her quick, active little eyes were not at all embarrassed. On the contrary, they looked at him steadily, and even with a shade of resentment. Evidently Selmadova was marrying her for her beauty. She was dressed up in a white muslin dress over a pink slip. Her neck was thin, and she had a figure like a chicken's, with bones all sticking out. She was not equal to making any response to the general's affability. "But she is very pretty," he went on in an undertone, as though addressing Selmadova only, though intentionally speaking so that the only the so, but though intentionally speaking so that the bride could hear. But on this occasion too Selmadova again answered absolutely nothing, and did not even wriggle. Even Ilyich fancied that there was something cold, suppressed in his eyes, as though he had something peculiarly malignant in his mind, and yet he had at all costs to wring some sensibility out of him. Why, that was the object of his coming. "They are a couple, though," he thought. And he turned again to the bride, who had settled herself beside him on the sofa, but in answer to his 2 or 3 questions he got nothing but yes or no, and hardly that. "If only she'd been overcome with confusion," he thought to himself, "then I should have begun to banter her, but as it is, my position is impossible." And as ill luck would have it, Akim Petrovitch too was mute, though this was only due to his foolishness. It was still unpardonable. "My friends, haven't I perhaps interfered with your enjoyments?" he said, addressing the whole company. He felt the very palms of his hands were perspiring. "No, don't trouble, your Excellency. We are beginning directly, but now we are getting cool," answered the officer.